and welcome to the Content 10x podcast. I'm your host, Amy Woods, and I am joined by our co-host, Jason Morton, again on the podcast. So, Jason, welcome to the podcast once again.
Hello, welcome. Excited for the show.
Great to have you back, Jason. I'm loving this new format that we are trying here on the Content 10x podcast. I hope that you liked episode 295 about creating content with your audience versus for your audience, which Jason and I recorded as the first attempt at co-hosting the Content 10x podcast. We're digging into another topic that I briefly touched on in the interview that I did with John Bernini in episode 294. So that was an episode all about how to create a content brand. And in that really great conversation, highly recommend checking it out, content10x.com/294. We spoke about link dumping. And in this episode, we're going to dig deeper into what that is. So we're going to look at what link dumping is and how to tell if you are doing it, what the impacts are of link dumping. We're going to look at the positives of not doing link dumping, as well as the negative impacts of going ahead and doing that. And also, very importantly, what to do instead. So how to avoid link dumping. Now, I've said the term link dumping many times already. I think it's very important now that we explain what we mean by link dumping. So, Jason, I'll hand over to you. What do we define as link dumping?
Yeah, so John actually explained this really well. He had this really effective barometer for it. And I think a lot of us in marketing do this. I definitely have done this many times. So if you take away the link from your post, does it still have value? Does it still do something that's useful or engaging or entertaining or educational for your audience? If not, if it's kind of empty and it doesn't make sense, then it's probably a link dump. That's the easiest way to explain it. And when we talk about this, let us not be all high and mighty. We've definitely been, the internet is evolving constantly, and the way that you post content changes continuously. The way what works on LinkedIn changes, I think, maybe monthly. So, we've all done this before, but what we want to do is share some of the best practices now that we're seeing work and maybe what to avoid. So, I guess the difference between link dumping and posting in a valuable way is that you're starting to use some other techniques that mean that once that link's taken away, the person still gets a good experience with your content.
Absolutely. I love that test that John talked about in the episode where he said exactly that. Remove the link and is this still a valuable post? And if it's not, then you've done a check this out, here's a link post and not added any value. This is something that I spoke about with Amanda Natividad on the Content 10x podcast. It was episode 266 again, another great episode, content10x.com/266. And it was called Exploring Zero-Click Content, something that Amanda's become really well known for as a term that she has been really trying to evangelize and get people to think about around this zero-click content. It's the same kind of thing. So she defined that as publishing content to any platform where clicking to leave the platform is additive to the experience, but it's not required. So you do not need to click anything. This was a valuable post, but you can have a link in the post. We're not saying no links at all. We're saying don't make the link the purpose of the post. I think that's a really important point here, that you can share links, but be, I guess, kind of sparing sometimes with how many links so that every post that you put out isn't full of links, and just think about, the use of them and that the post is still valuable. When I was in that conversation with Amanda, we had a really good conversation about the detrimental impact of adding links to your social media posts. So when we were discussing, zero-click content, should it have any link at all? We did conclude it was okay, but when you do share links, you have to be aware of some of the impacts. One of those is diminished reach. So the algorithms often do not favor you when you are putting links, because of course what you're doing is you're sending people to another platform, another place. So they're not going to be too happy with that. So that's something that you need to be aware of. And I know that you mentioned that you did a little bit of a exercise on this, didn't you, in terms of link sharing. and seeing if you saw a change in the reach and impact. Do you want to just share a bit about that? Because it was really interesting when you were explaining to me about this little test that you did.
Yeah, so I mean, this is typical of a lot of social posting. You post what you think is going to be your worst post, or even purposefully your worst post, and it gets loads of engagement. And the one you spend hours on gets nothing. So I put out just a post with literally an apology, essentially, for taking up your attention to the LinkedIn. And it just had our website at the top within the post, a link to our website, content10x.com, then youtube.com, then facebook.com. So I was kind of taking the mick really with this, in the sense that I was sending people to every other platform that was a competitor for LinkedIn. Now, of course, I said in there, this is an experiment. If what I know about LinkedIn is true, this won't get seen by many people at all. And then my average is about a good post for me is about 15 likes. You know, I'm not a regular poster as much as I should be. So I got 15 likes, and I was like, this has kind of ruined it, because I guess the people wanted to find out, and people engaged as well, commented and kind of engaged to say, let me know how it goes, what are the results are. But of course that accentuated the reach. But it was useful in the sense that comparatively, another post that didn't have a link dump structure, i.e. it had a story told, a kind of comparative, a comparison between content 10x, content repurposing and hip hop, and it showed a video within, like, uploaded to LinkedIn, so it didn't take the user away. And then eventually did have a link, but in the comments, that had 1,000 times more impressions or reach with the same amount of engagement. So it's not quite like for like, because, you know, different people engaged, so with different audiences. So that would have influenced it a bit. But you definitely saw less people saw my message because on the link dumping post, because all I'd done was very short text, spammed it with links. Wasn't really anything there to read. It wasn't a lot of stuff to engage with. People did engage, but you weren't sitting on that post and reading it and watching it. Whereas the first one had, you know, sort of a video to watch. It had something to read. People might have come back to it, or, you know, it was shared a few times. So I guess I did learn something from it, although it was ruined a little bit by the engagement. And it did show that links spammed in like that with no real story and a lack of dwell time. And I think that's another part of this as well. Like, having content that gets people to pause and stop, I think definitely makes a difference. I mean, when this first came out a little while ago about dwell time and getting people to stop, I remember seeing loads of these infographics that were like really detailed, often something to do with like marketing technology, and it'd be like all the different software and apps you could get and where they sit on the funnel and stuff. And I remember looking at them and thinking, this is clever, because I'm having to like stop and zoom in really closely to find what I'm trying to work out. And then LinkedIn seeing that and going, oh, this is a popular post. People really study it. I don't know if that still works anymore, and I don't know how heavy this influence is, but definitely having something about your post that causes people to stop and listen and watch, whether that's a video, whether that's something they can watch with subtitles along the bottom, makes such a big difference compared to just, you know, a little bit of text, 3 bullet points, and then a link to your website. I don't think LinkedIn likes that anymore.
No. And it, you know, it's, you know, we're talking about LinkedIn in particular here, and it's the same with all the platforms really, isn't it? They don't like it when your purpose of your post really is to get people to click a link, which is exactly how we defined posts that link dumps, where there's no real value, and the real reason for the post is the clicking of the link, whereas the zero-click content or non-link dump content is a valuable post in its own right. And then if it has a link, that's just additive to get a bit more value. Something that, when I was on the podcast episode chatting to Amanda Natividad, something that she said, which I thought was a really interesting way of looking at it, when we were discussing whether you should or shouldn't add links at all, we were talking about if you're, you know, optimizing for impressions and engagement, so you're not linking people out, because the point of the post is to get some discussion, impressions, engagement. She talked about how she views it as you build this algorithmic capital, was her phrase. So you get all these brownie points, I suppose, with the platform, because you're just putting these posts out. They're seeing, oh, people engage and it'll give you a bit more reach. And like you said, people are having a longer dwell time on this really great piece of content. They really like what you've got to say. So that when you do then maybe occasionally rather than repeatedly hit people with a link, you're more likely to get more reach on that post to begin with, because you've built up this capital and you've become in favour with the algorithms. So they're not as likely to diminish your reach as much as a regular link sharer. They're not going to ding you as much. And again, we were talking a lot about LinkedIn, but I think the same thing goes for Twitter, or X, I should say, in particular. They treat you pretty badly if your purpose is sharing links, don't they? So I guess to summarize, we're not saying don't share links, but we're saying be judicious about them. Think about how it does affect your reach, in terms of sharing them. And very importantly, let's just make it not the purpose of the post. Let's make it additive to the post. Now, when we often talk about link dumping, quite often we're talking about there'll be a longer form piece of content like a blog post or a podcast episode or an article, something like that. And we're saying, don't say, check this out, here's a link, but we're saying add some value. At least if you were link dumping, it would be taking people to some free content. Of course, the other side is there's link dumping and it's taking people to gated content. So it's even more of an ask. I know you've got some thoughts on this, haven't you, Jason, in terms of probably the worst form of link dumping is link dumping a social post to a gated piece of content.
Yeah, and again, this is stuff like this was the book on how to do marketing for so long, and I still think you can get results like this, but I don't think it's the easiest way to get results anymore. I think it's kind of not what works for years and years and years. Is people are getting tired of. I think people have had so many bad experiences where they've seen the kind of headline that's almost promises quite a lot in the headline, like, do you want the 10 things that's going to save your, get you hired or get you to the next level of where you are, whether you've got an organizational problem or something that, at work that you need to solve. So there'll be that post, you'll click the link, take it to a landing page. The landing page is like, oh, but here it is, you're almost there, and you'll fill in the form. Hopefully the form is quite small, but by that point you're already like, okay, like you're probably on the move when you're doing this, or, you haven't got that much time. And then you're left with a PDF that, maybe didn't fulfill all the promises that engaging
yeah, exactly.
LinkedIn post promised. And you're like, do you know what? And then it comes the nurturing emails from people like me saying, hey, you've downloaded this thing. Let's talk. So I think like that definitely has a place. And if you've got a good offer, that'll still work, right? If you've got the right messaging and stuff, but the quality just has to be a bit better now. Like, how are you going to break through the noise? Because everyone's doing that. That's the kind of standard for B2B marketing. If you've not got someone thinking strategically, that's what everyone's doing. I think people are so tired of it. I think now it has to be a bit better. I think now you have to start building this kind of this brand for yourself as someone who delivers when they say you've got a guide that's going to take you from A to Z. And I'm not going to, maybe I don't ask for your details up front. Maybe I ask for them at the end or in another way. Maybe there's other ways of approaching it, which I think we'll come on to in a bit. But yeah, there's different ways of doing it, isn't there?
Yeah, 100%. Let's look at some of those ways. So if we are repurposing content, so let's say we've got that longer form piece of content in whatever format that may be, we're going to repurpose that for social so that when we do share links, they are going to be as part of a valuable post. So we are not going to link dump. So let's explain some ways to do that. I'll let you get started with explaining a bit about, I guess, what we do with the long form content, how our approach goes at Content 10X, Jason.
Yeah, okay. So it starts with a little bit of language change. So I've done this again. I've done this as very, it's that case of how do we make this a 0-click policy for the publishing of this content for this campaign. We've got a lot of stuff to say. What's our angle on each piece? What's the hook for each piece? How do we keep people interested so they can see like this topic is being handled well, comprehensively, and actually I've seen a few different things on this, a few different videos. Maybe I should watch the whole episode. You know the ones where it could be B2C content. It's the same there. You'll see a few snippets of the same podcast, and you'll go, do you know what? That one actually looks like a good episode. Maybe I'll give the full episode a go. That's what you're trying to create, that kind of thing, but on a B2B level. So what would you be interested in? What can you ask your audience? What are the themes that they'll engage with? Those are some of the beginning things to think about when you're doing this zero click policy, as we call it, at Content 10x.
I agree. I think it's a clever process that you need to go through in terms of extracting that value. So, there's all of these different points that have been made in this key piece of content. So yeah, like you said, what would people be interested in? What would people like to see short snippets of? Where are the different angles? We don't want to seem repetitive if we want to create quite a lot of social content about this most recent podcast episode that we did or webinar that we did. How can we break it down into new and different ways of sharing all the points that were made, all the different angles? Maybe we shared the how to do in the podcast and we could share the how to avoid in the social posts and things like that. So it's really, firstly, isn't it, about extracting the value? What's all the value that can come from this that we can share on social? As you said, knowing your audience, what mediums would work best as well. So if we're going to try and break this content down and create really valuable social posts, then what should that look like? Should that be in the form of short videos? Should that be, like, say, for example, if it was a 10-point episode, 10 ways to start a podcast, then it could be 10 separate posts. It could be a 10-slide carousel. As long as each post is going to be adding value in terms of how we are sharing that and not being repetitive with a link dump. I think that there are different ways that you can do this to avoid, I guess, sort of teasing your audience as well. But this is something that you and I spoke about, isn't it, Jason, in terms of sometimes you see that kind of clickbaity tease, but there's a way that you can tease in a clever way, isn't there?
I mean, how many of those TikToks do you, well, this might be an admission really, but how many of the videos do you watch where it's like they've caught you, something's happening, if it's entertaining, shocking, whatever it is, and then you just waiting, and then now obviously we're getting wise to it, we're fast forwarding the video, we're making sure it's not 2 minutes long, because you just know at the end there'll be follow for part 2. And you're like, for God's sake.
No.
But that's exactly what we're talking about. It's like there's enough value there for me to be like engaged, engrossed. I know that something's going to happen that I am going to be interested in, and it's like, okay, maybe I don't know if I do. I do sometimes follow them when it's like educational stuff, or like, when it's just someone falling over. Like I can live without seeing that.
Yeah.
But the crazy thing is, I mean, you've already invested maybe 2 minutes of your time, so you're like, oh, let's see how this plays out. Let's see if it's worthwhile. But there's been some element of value in there that's caught my attention. I want to see how that story ends. And then you don't want to think, well, I've wasted 2 minutes without knowing the ending. So I mean, that's a good example of it in a very short, kind of dynamic way on TikTok with the story loops. But yeah, there's clever ways about doing this. There's like, I think you talked about this with regards to, like, if you could be giving away 5 really key bits of value. You don't have to give all 5 away, but just make the first 3 really, really strong, and then save maybe 2 of the ones that you think are the ones that really make the difference once they've downloaded.
Exactly. I don't think there's anything wrong with that kind of thing in terms of, let's say, for example, you said, I don't know, you're a podcast company and you've said that we've done an article on the top 5 microphones to buy or something like that, and you want to get people over to your blog post on that. And on your social, you do a video or whatever it may be, where you share the top 3. And then you say, if you want to know what the final 2 were within our study that we did, then head on over here to the full article. I kind of feel like, I don't think there's anything wrong with that if you were applying the rules of what we said about link dumping, truly take the link away and did the post add value or not. Because in that case, it was valuable. You shared the top 3 and someone came away with some useful information from it. And you sort of cleverly tease that there's more added value if you click the link, but you're not being left high and dry with nothing. I like those like videos that never get to the punchline and that kind of thing. You're not being left without anything at all. I think things like that, breaking things down, into that kind of like, there's good value here, but like the full meaty, in-depth piece of content has more. So another example would be if you've got, for example, a big white paper or research study or something like that, and you pick out some of the powerful statistics and findings and facts and create social content from that, eye-catching graphics, things like that, maybe an infographic, or you do some short videos. You can pick out some of the main ones, whilst of course still let people know that you have another really interesting, tip or piece of advice about this statistic, like this statistic on a problem. And then if you want to know our 3 ways to overcome this problem, well, that's over there in the blog post, because it's still valuable, isn't it? And I think that's the main point that we're really trying to say here, is that you can share links, but just be a bit careful with them and don't overdo them. And don't make the link the purpose of the post. Make sure that the post is valuable in its own right and the link is additive to the experience. But then how do you do that? Well, every single post has to look at things from a different angle, a different perspective, share a different point of view, start a different conversation, look at the different ways to communicate, a graphic, a video, things like that. So it's being creative in breaking the content down, isn't it? So that it is a good experience for everyone. People will engage. And then if people click, great. If they don't, then, they'll find a way to the content, won't they? If they like what you're saying and they think you're sharing good advice, even if they're not keen on clicking a link, or you don't share a link, as we were saying, people find a way. I'm sure you found that as well. People will find a way to you, won't they?
Yeah, exactly. I think as long as you don't leave people feeling shortchanged, and also the channel, don't let the LinkedIn sees how long people tend to spend on your posts, and they see how often you post a link like within the post, so they know whether you're using them or whether they can use you, whether you're generating content that can be useful to make people spend more time on LinkedIn, or if you're just using LinkedIn to get people to your website every time. Like that, they're aware of that. Like they'll play into what you were talking about earlier in terms of the algorithm value you have. So yeah, make sure you're not shortchanging the channel, and don't shortchange the people that are downloading, and you're adding value at each stage of that process. That's what it kind of comes back to as well.
Yeah, I think we've made our most important points there, haven't we? I hope this has been a really useful episode for everybody listening in. As I said, we kind of started this conversation in the John Bonini episode where we talked about link dumping, and we felt that it would be really good to kind of just dig deeper into the Content 10x perspective of this, because I think it's really important, and it is a mistake that we often see people make, where they might launch some kind of content and their only social content is short little promo posts that simply broadcast with a link. And we don't want you to do that. We want you to think a bit more and apply these tests, see if you link dumping, and then hopefully through the advice that we've given on this show, we've provided some good guidance on what to do instead. So thanks, Jason. Another good episode. Nice having you on the show, shooting the breeze, talking about these things.
Thanks for having me. It's nice. I didn't realise we do a lot of moaning on techniques. I better make sure that ours is on.
I know, we need to practice what we preach. I know.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
All of our social content from this episode cannot link dump. We have to practice. Imagine if we were putting out promo posts about this episode and they were literally a link dump.
That'd be brilliant.
You won't find us doing that. Well, thank you so much for everybody who's tuned in. We appreciate you. So thank you. Hope this has been useful. We'll wrap the episode up there. So just a little reminder that if you want support with your content, so if you're creating podcasts, video content, webinars, research, white papers, any kind of long form valuable content, and you want some support with maximizing, repurposing and distributing that, then you know where to go. Just get in touch with us at Content 10x, content10x.com, and let's have a conversation and see if we can support you. And I promise that the content we create for you will have no link dumping and we will create valuable content. So yeah, just get in touch, content10x.com. So thank you very much for listening. All that's left to say is happy repurposing, and we'll catch you in the next episode.